Here's what's coming up on the world today. Kenyans vote in general elections today, but focus is on the presidential election between Raila Odinga and William Ruto. Former U.S. President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home in Florida searched by the FBI. The former president says it was a raid. It's extreme weather conditions still playing up around the world. The South Korean capital Seoul seen its heaviest rainfall in decades. A warm welcome to the program, especially to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. I am Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. Begin in Kenya, where more than 22 million people hopefully cast their ballot in the country's general elections. But of course, the focus is on who becomes the next president. After Uhuru Kenyatta, who's rounding up his second term in office, is stepping down. The two main candidates are Mr. Kenyatta's vice president, William Ruto, and longtime politician Raila Odinga. There have been fears of violence in Mr. Odinga's home province of Kisumu, but so far there have been no major hitches in Kisumu and its environs.
Voters started queuing before dawn across Kenya, eager to cast their votes and pick who will run the country for the next 5 years. Delays and logistical problems have been reported in some places, but in general, the process is reported to be smooth. The vote follows an intense campaign dominated by debates about living costs, unemployment and corruption in the country. The frontrunners are former Prime Minister Raila Odinga and Deputy President William Ruto. 77-year-old former Prime Minister Odinga ran his campaign centering on social protection and anti-corruption. This is his fifth attempt at Kenya's helm of affairs. The other major contender is Deputy President William Ruto. The 55-year-old has had a political career spanning decades. Voting in Sugoi province, Mr. Ruto called on voters to vote carefully.
I am very confident that the people of Kenya will make choices that will take our country to the future.
The outgoing president, Uhuru Kenyatta, is backing his former foe, Mr. Odinga, after falling out with his own deputy. Kenyatta, who is stepping down from the helm of East Africa's economic powerhouse after reaching the end of his two-term limit, called on Kenyans to turn out in large numbers, vote peacefully and await the results.
This is a day of voting. I think this is a day where we all want to pray that Kenyans vote, turn out and vote in peace, go back to their homes as we await the result.
To avoid a runoff, a presidential candidate needs more than 50% of votes and at least 25% of the votes cast in half of Kenya's 47 counties. There are 22.1 million registered voters, and the provincial results are expected to start streaming in on Tuesday night, but an official announcement could take days.
Let's bring in Kenyan journalist Chibet Biri, who's been monitoring the polls from the capital, Nairobi. Chibet, thank you for joining us on the program. The polls have closed. Has counting begun?
Good evening. Yes, the polls have closed and the counting has begun in more than 46,000 polling stations, 46,229 polling stations in the country. And so what we have to do is just wait for the results, as the counting has already begun.
Yeah, and media outlets have been reporting there have been no major hitches. How do Kenyans feel about the polls today so far?
Yes, there have not been major hitches, considering there have not been any violence, extreme violence reported. So far, so good, if that is what it means for no major hitches. But when it comes to democracy and allowing our candidates who have the constitutional rights to be on the ballot, I can give an example of presidential aspirant Ruben Kigame, who was locked out of the ballot for reasons that were not clear. So as we stand, the elections went on, but he still has a case in court which has not been, the ruling has not been given yet. That is just one. The electoral boundaries and the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission has several other cases in court from candidates. So this election has gone on, but IEBC has still cases in court. Now, how Kenyans are taking it, they have, it seems that they have accepted the outcome of whoever is on the ballot. And so that's how they have decided they will come out in numbers and vote. And as you can see, they are voting. So what we have to do is wait for the results. What matters now is that we all maintain peace as a country, and that is what every leader is sending. Every leader, that is the message every leader is sending out to Kenyans. Despite the outcome, we need to maintain peace.
Yeah, Chebet, I understand the confusion where you're trying to say we, they, because you're also Kenyan and you're also voting in the election, so I perfectly understand a confusion there. But this is one of the most expensive elections in Africa. For a 22 million population of voters, the Electoral Commission is reportedly spending a whopping $374 million budget on the election. That's nearly double the cost of India's election and Nigeria's upcoming election. How is the government able to fund this, and is there a breakdown of how the money is being disbursed?
Yes, I agree with you that we have the most expensive elections in our country. Not just this election, but the previous election in 2017 was also hugely, extremely expensive because we actually had to do a rerun. So that was double the expenditure, you can imagine. And so, no, there has not been any breakdown as to how this money is being spent, nor is there a clear information. There is no clear information as to where this money is coming from. So what we are doing is, we know that it is the government which is giving out this money. We don't know where they're getting the money from. And if you look at the situation in the country, it's quite a tricky situation to spend too much on elections when people are suffering in poverty, hunger. The economy in the country is at stake. So that's how we are at the moment.
Yeah, elections do take up a lot of funds, but this one, really interesting. Thanks again, Chebet. We know you have to get back to monitoring. We really appreciate the updates you're giving us.
Thank you, too.
Let's turn now to the United States, where something unprecedented took place Monday night. Former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home in Florida was searched by the FBI, but the former president calls it a raid on his home. A search is reportedly connected to an investigation into Mr. Trump's handling of official papers and whether he took classified records from the White House. Mr. Trump said the FBI agents not only raided his home, but broke into his safe. The unprecedented search of a former president's home would mark a significant escalation into the records investigation, which is one of the several probes that Trump is facing from his time in office and private business. The U.S. Justice Department has declined to comment on the search. Also not forthcoming with an explanation is the FBI's headquarters in Washington and its field office in Miami. Many supporters of the former president gathered outside his residence in Florida to once again show their support for the former president. Trump himself was not at the estate at the time of the raid. Meanwhile, Republican National Committee is said to be trying to leverage anger over the FBI's search to generate fundraising for the Republican Party candidates. Trump is thought to be preparing for a possible third presidential run in 2024. He is, however, facing numerous investigations, including a congressional inquiry into the January 6 Capitol riots.
In my own opinion, I think it's another unjust, made-up thing like the impeachment hoaxes, and same with the January 6th. Because Trump didn't do anything wrong with January 6th because he ordered the National Guard, and Nancy Pelosi denied it.
The Biden administration, the Democrats are weaponizing the FBI, and it has to stop. The FBI is not here to weaponize against another president. It never has happened before. They should go after things that are clearly a violation, meaning the Hunter laptop, which they don't even have to investigate because the laptop is right there, all the evidence is there. Hillary, all of that is not investigated. President Trump is investigated because they're scared that he's running, and he will win again.
in my opinion, this is communism. Right here, you can see where I'm from. I live this. I know what this is all about. Weaponize DOJ, weaponize FBI, weaponize the IRS. That's what they've been doing.
Let's go live now to our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird. She joins us from the studio there. Maria, has there been any information regarding the reason for this search at Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence?
The information, as we said, is very limited. As you all have been able to provide a brief context, what we know is that yesterday the FBI did raid the home. That was, obviously the big conversation is around, this is the FBI director that President Trump put in place that is now putting an investigation against him. And so there's clearly some details that have come out of the January 6th hearings. And obviously there has been investigation all along over the last few years, to be quite honest, as it relates to some classified information and records. And so this is going to continue to be a very quiet investigation until they're able to have some real true evidence. But I can tell you that it's expected that they do have clear evidence even before the raid occurred. And it's probably more evidence than what would be for an individual who was not a former president of the U.S.
So it is being rumored that the FBI is looking for classified records that Trump may have taken home from the White House. What happens if they do find those records in his home?
If they find those records in his home, then we will likely see him being brought up for some sort of a trial. They will bring charges against him very likely. And so that's why they're being very careful about exactly how they release information in this regard. And so the January 6th hearing will only be a subset to what we could further see, because the FBI obviously is a separate entity that will be conducting this investigation and could be bringing forth these charges.
The move is unprecedented, Maria. We never heard, of a former American president being treated this way. No other American president actually has been treated this way. How does that reflect on not just the former president, Trump, but the Republican Party, which is still solidly behind him, preparing for 2024, and the future of elections and governance in America?
You're exactly correct. This is unprecedented. It was a lot of comparison between former President Trump and former President Nixon. We talked about the Watergate scandal early on in the process, but this is even very different than that situation because, as you said, he's looking to run for a third time, which would be, coming up here in the 2024 election cycle. And so we know that he has big aspirations for potentially coming back to the White House. We know, as you stated before, there are still many supporters of former President Trump. We still have a contingency within the Republican Party that serve in Congress that are considered to be kind of a part of the MAGA party of the Republican Party, those kind of newer Republicans that are in alignment from an ideology perspective as a former President Trump. So we are in a very different state of affairs here in America that we have not seen before. As we know, with former President Nixon, many people abandoned him when he went through the Watergate scandal. And so we're seeing how many Americans are still strong supporters of the former president. We're still seeing many individuals who raided and, overcame and went into Congress and the Capitol on January 6th, still being arraigned and arrested and still being tried on those cases. So this is something that we've never seen before. And something that I think many Americans are going to continue to watch, but are, to be honest, those who are not supporters of President Trump are very concerned about what could happen in the next election cycle for president.
So Trump supporters were at his home, near his home in Mar-a-Lago, declaring their support for the former president. And the FBI is keeping mum on its operations, as you rightly said. There's a lot going on. They don't want to give anything away because they really have to be careful. Are there other leaders in America who have commented on what has happened? Trump himself has said it was a raid. He wasn't at home when this happened.
Yeah, so other leaders, have obviously spoken out, especially those who are not in support of the former president, stating that this is exactly why the January 6th hearings are going as they are, have gone for as long as they've gone. They obviously are bringing forth areas that they have always had concerns with the former president, because obviously they don't want to see the former president have any sense of potentially being a candidate for the Republican Party come the next election cycle. And so those individuals have been outspoken. Obviously, those who are supporters of him have said that this is nothing, but a encroachment on his character. This is the Democrats trying to, push their own agenda. So it has become a very politically divided situation, but even politically divided within the own Republican Party, because those who are Cheney supporters are obviously going to see this as something that should be done, because they would not be in support of the former president being a part of the next election cycle.
Maria, thanks again for the update.
Yeah.
Just a day after the start of a truce in the Gaza Strip, reports say the local head of the Palestinian militant group, the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, has been killed in an Israeli operation in the occupied West Bank. 26-year-old Ibrahim al-Nabulsi and 2 other people were killed during the raid on a house in the city. However, at least 40 people were injured in the raid. So says the Palestinian Red Crescent. The group is a network of militia linked to Fatah, the Palestinian movement, which controls the West Bank. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of Palestinians held this march in a funeral procession for Ibrahim. The Israeli military says he was suspected of carrying out several shooting attacks against Israeli civilians and soldiers. In another development, head of Lebanon's powerful armed movement Hezbollah, Syed Hassan Nasrallah, says any attempts by Israel, by Israel to expand the targeting of Palestinian militants to Lebanon will not be supported. The comments came out of flare-up in violence between Israel and the Islamic Jihad movement in the Gaza Strip, prompted by Israel's arrest of a senior Islamic Jihad leader earlier this month. And on Saturday, Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz hinted at the possible targeting of Islamic Jihad officials abroad, saying that he said could be seen in restaurants and hotels in Tehran, in Syria and in Lebanon. On Monday, a day after truce brokered by Egypt ended the Gaza violence, he said Israel could carry out preemptive strikes abroad. Coming up after the break. It reminds me of the Titanic. One Seoul resident describing the floods in the South Korean capital has left at least 8 people dead. Stay with us. Welcome back to the program. Keeping our eyes on the weather, heavy rains, a type not seen in South Korea in decades, has triggered fatal floods in the capital, Seoul, leaving at least 8 people dead. The torrential rains knocked out power lines, caused landslides and submerged roads and subways across the capital and in a neighboring province.
Heavy rainfall on Monday night knocked out power lines, caused landslides and flooded roads and rail stations across South Korean capital Seoul and neighboring provinces. In the capital's glitzy Gangnam district, buildings flooded and vehicles submerged, leaving many stranded, such as 31-year-old office worker Lim Na-kyung, who slept in a fitness studio overnight.
I couldn't believe that I was trapped in a building with 40 other people in the middle of Gangnam district due to floods. It reminds me of Titanic. I was so scared. My 2 little sons were waiting at home, so I wanted to go back home, which was only 10 minutes away, but I couldn't possibly move. The situation was unbelievable. I've finally begun to feel the impact of climate change.
Official data shows at least 765 facilities have been damaged, while around 52 highways and roads have been blocked. According to officials on Tuesday, at least 163 people in Seoul have been made homeless and have taken shelter in schools and public facilities. Visiting a flood-hit area in the capital on Tuesday, President Yoon Suk-yeol blamed climate change.
The
intensive heavy rain that broke the record for hourly precipitation in Korea's meteorological history is believed to be due to abnormal weather conditions caused by climate change. The government should review the current disaster management system from scratch, taking into account these abnormal weather conditions caused by climate change.
The president has also ordered government officials to evacuate residents from high-risk areas and urged businesses to grant employees flexible commuting hours on Tuesday morning. Although South Korea often experiences heavy rain during the summer, according to Korea's Meteorological Administration, it's the worst rainfall in decades.
There will be more hot days ahead in the UK as the Met Office issues a 4-day amber extreme heat warning, with temperatures set to reach up to 35 degrees Celsius in some areas this week. The warning applies to southern and central England and parts of Wales from midnight on Thursday until Sunday. It follows the first ever red warning issued in July when temperatures exceeded 40 degrees Celsius for the first time. Meanwhile, Thames Water has become the latest water firm to announce plans for a hosepipe ban in the coming weeks. The company said the move was a response to forecasts of more hot and dry weather and that exact timings would be confirmed later. Hosepipe bans are already in force in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and others are due to come into force in Kent, Sussex, Pembrokeshire and Carmarthenshire. And just a reminder that extreme weather conditions are being experienced across the world. Many evacuated from flooded areas in Pakistan are housed in school buildings on higher plains, concerned about their future and that of their kids, and trying to make sense of the food shortage that has already befallen them. Yesterday we told you glaciers in the Swiss Alps have vanished because of the heat wave in Europe this summer. Zermatt, a world-class ski resort at the foot of the Matterhorn, famous for its hiking and ski region, is Europe's largest and highest-lying summer skiing region and receives tourists all over the world every year. This year was different. They've seen fewer skiers, temperatures have soared to 30 degrees Celsius, and the Alps are warming at around 0.3 degrees Celsius per decade. That's around twice as fast as the global average. And here's one blowing our minds. On the continent, in sharp contrast to the heat waves across Europe, there's a ski fest going on in the southern African country of Lesotho. While cold winters are not rare in much of the region, snow is. People, however, in the tiny mountain kingdom surrounded by South Africa have been enjoying the ski resorts in the Maluti Mountains, the only operating ski resort south of the equator. And this, of course, are just some of the places around the world experiencing crazy weather. Let's talk more about the weather and climatic conditions changing around the world. I want to bring in climate change experts, Dr. John Osonwa. He joins us from our studio in Abuja. Dr. Osonwa, thank you for joining us this evening. Floods in Asia, the heat wave in Europe, and then snow in Lesotho. How are you interpreting these events?
Well, what we are seeing is consistent with what we have been saying, that climate change is a threat multiplier in the sense that if you are used to having floods, you're going to have more floods, more severe floods, more extreme floods. If you're used to having heat waves, you will have greater heat waves, as we're seeing in Europe. The level of carbon emission that we're putting into the atmosphere is warming up the atmosphere. And when that happens, it traps excess water vapor, which in turn comes down as precipitation. So that's why we're having flooding. Then the extreme heat is also melting the ice caps, as we saw with the ski result in the Swiss Alps. We're also seeing the same thing in the Arctic region. 30 million square kilometers of ice, about half of that is gone in the last 30 years. It has fed the oceans. When we look at South Korea, what is happening? South Korea is on the Pacific Ocean. The Arctic Circle feeds the Pacific Ocean, feeds the Atlantic Ocean. So the sea level is higher already. Now, when you have this level of precipitation coming down, 6 inches per hour, never been experienced in South Korea, you're going to have massive flooding. So it's all pointing to climate change. We are putting out so much greenhouse gases, 30 million tons of carbon dioxide being put into the atmosphere every year now. And that is making the climate crazy. In fact, literally, we're drugging the planet, and it's behaving in ways that are very erratic.
Wow, that is quite a damning figure and a bleak prediction. Why is it different, though, here in Nigeria? Because it appears we're supposed to be on an August break, but that began in the month of July. And the Nigerian Meteorological Agency says we'll still have more rains this year. Is that still a reality?
That is the thing that we are grappling with. When it comes to climate change, we used to see sub-regional weather variability. Now we're seeing global weather variability, where in one instance, when you expect to see rainy season, you won't find it. When you expect to see dry season, you won't find it. That is a classic symptom of climate change, weather variability. So I believe the only thing that is predictable about our weather now is the unpredictability. We may yet see a lot of rain in Nigeria, and I think that's to be expected. The southern region of the country typically goes through the rainy season up until November. So we still have a few months of rain, and based on what we're seeing globally, we should expect to see a lot of rain because the temperature is warming up at an alarming rate in so many areas. That leads to greater evapotranspiration, where you have subduction of water from the oceans, the trees, the lakes, even the land itself. As we speak now, we have about 7% more water vapor trapped in the atmosphere. And that eventually comes down as rain, the kind of what we're seeing in South Korea. So I don't think it's the end of the season yet. We are historically prone to August breaks in Nigeria. This time it happened a little bit early, that's fine. But we still need to be very vigilant because we are now at a flood risk in Nigeria in so many areas. People living along the river banks, Niger and Benue, people up in the Mambila area, they need to be very cautious and very watchful.
Yeah, and people also need to move to higher plains too, I guess. If this is how, the summers are on the other side of the world, how then do you predict the winter months will be for those in Europe and Northern America?
Well, the situation we're facing now for much of Europe is unprecedented. We are looking at, you're looking at England that has recorded the driest month in July. You're looking at France, you're looking at Germany. In some places, in the last 100 years, they haven't had it so dry. Drought is ravaging that region. So I predict that we're going to see the reverse. When we get to winter, we're going to see severe winters because climate change is a game of precipitation and lack thereof. When the weather is extremely hot, you have dry conditions. When the weather becomes cold, you're going to see a lot of moisture coming back. That moisture has already been trapped in the atmosphere. As I said, we have 7% more moisture since we increased the global temperature by 1 degree Celsius. If you go back to the year 1900, when we started counting forward, the pre-industrial age, we have increased the global temperature by about 1 degree Celsius. And when you do that, you increase the likelihood of severe flooding and severe rain by 10%. So that's what we are facing now. So I believe that the winter months will also bring some misery to Europe just because of the issue of climate change.
Yeah, and they have to prepare for that, don't they? Scientists say the Earth warmed an extra 1 degree Celsius. We're not doing enough to slow down climate change. And in what ways could the weather conditions worsen?
Well, let me begin with the last bit of that. When you look at what climate change is doing now, whether we're talking about extreme weather events. You look at the United States, we're seeing wildfires. You look at Australia, we're seeing wildfires. In Europe, we're seeing heat waves. We are seeing in Africa droughts and desertification here in Nigeria ravaging the landscape. We are seeing climate refugeeism. We are seeing people, forced migration, people being displaced. We are seeing cattle unable to graze because there's no grazing land. Lake Chad has dried up by over 90% in the last 30 years. So those are some of the symptoms. And based on what we're seeing every year now, in terms of global temperature, the temperature increase surpasses the year before. We are eclipsing the records at a very historic pace. You look at the last 12 years, we have set the highest global temperature records in the past 10 years, since we started recording this in 1880. So the trend is going to point to more severe weather events, more frequent weather events, greater impact on our infrastructure, on agriculture, low yields, crop failures, droughts, starvation. So we need to do more. We are not doing enough. There are a lot of pledges, a lot of promises to give money. The rich countries are not giving the money. And then this war in Ukraine has set us back a lot because people are now hogging coal and fossil fuels. And those were energy resources that we tried to get away from. So we need to really come. I think what is happening in Europe and in Asia is going to be a wake-up call to our leaders that we need to do more to combat climate change.
Wow, those are a really bleak future awaits us. That's, of course, if we don't do anything about it. And it does seem, well, we're actually slowly working on changing the climate, the environment. I just want to ask you very quickly, the U.S. yesterday just made, a record, the U.S. Senate, beg your pardon, passed a record climate bill. There's so much money being pumped into this. And what ways do you think that could actually help climate change conditions, whether for them or for us?
Yeah, that was a very, very heartwarming news when I saw that almost $400 billion in new funding, incentives, rebates, putting into renewables, putting into research. That's money that's going to change the world, literally, because some of that money is going to trickle down to Africa. It would allow us to do some projects. There are projects in the pipeline in Africa, tree planting projects, fossil fuel to gas conversion projects, coal eradication projects around the world. So the money is going to be very, very useful, particularly given that the Trump years, the U.S. divested from climate action. So this is, we're playing catch up now with this kind of funding. So it was a very welcome development. I think it's going to have a very wonderful impact all over the world, including here in Nigeria.
Dr. John Osonwa, a real pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Well, a quick recap of today's events and developments from the Russia-Ukraine invasion. Russia's defense ministry says Russian forces have destroyed an ammunition depot near the central Ukrainian city of Uman, storing U.S.-made HIMARS missiles and M777 howitzers. Reuters was unable to verify the battlefield reports, but in its daily briefing, the Russian defense ministry said it had destroyed over 300 rockets in the strike. Kyiv has hailed the arrival of advanced long-range HIMARS from the United States as a possible game changer, while Moscow has accused the West of dragging out the conflict by arming Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has dismissed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's call for a travel ban on all Russians as irrational, saying that Europe would ultimately have to decide if it wanted to pay the bills for Zelensky's whims. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said there was no chance Russians could be isolated from the rest of the world. He told reporters via telephone. The statement of Volodymyr Zelensky speaks for itself. Irrationality in this case goes through the roof. We can see it only in a very negative way. Any attempts to isolate Russians or Russia have no chances. He goes on to say Zelensky himself should understand that European countries which are trying to punish Russia, as they say, are already paying for it actively. Countries are paying the bills, citizens are paying the bills. Sooner or later, these countries will start to ask whether Zelensky does right things and whether their citizens should pay the bills for his whims. Russia's pipeline monopoly Transneft says Ukraine has suspended Russian oil flows to southern Europe since August 4 because Western sanctions meant it did not receive transit fees from Moscow. International benchmark crude jumped by $2 per barrel to trade near $98 as the news added to concerns about reduced energy supplies. Transneft said it made payments for August oil transit to Ukraine's pipeline operator UKR Transnafta on July 22nd but the money was sent back on July 28th as the payment did not go through. Gazprom Bank, which handled the payment, said the money was returned because of European Union restrictions. Transnet said in a statement, Russia normally supplies about 250,000 barrels per day via the southern leg of the Druzhba pipeline to Hungary, Slovakia and the Czech Republic. A Russian rocket carrying an Iranian satellite has successfully launched into space as Moscow and Tehran seek to build closer ties in the face of Western sanctions. The remote sensing satellite called Kayam was launched by a Russian Soyuz rocket from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, a home of Russian space launches located in southern Kazakhstan at 8:52 a.m. Moscow time today. The remote sensing satellite, Tehran rejected claims the satellite could be used by Moscow to boost its intelligence capabilities in Ukraine, saying Iran will have full control and operation over it from day one. U.S. media reported last week that officials are concerned by the fledgling space cooperation between Russia and Iran, fearing the satellite will not only help Russia in Ukraine, but also provide Iran unprecedented capabilities to monitor potential military targets in Israel and the wider Middle East. Iran says the satellite is designed for scientific research, including radiation and environmental monitoring for agricultural purposes. We're also continuing with reactions from U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan recently. Taiwan's foreign minister has accused China of using the military drills it launched in protest against Nancy Pelosi's visit as an excuse to prepare for an invasion of the self-ruled island. Joseph Wu says Taiwan, which is claimed by China as its own, would not be intimidated even as the drills continue, with China often breaching the unofficial median line down the Taiwan Strait. He made that comment as the Eastern Theater Command of the Chinese People's Liberation Army announced today it will continue to hold military drills and exercises in the seas and airspace around the island of Taiwan.
China has used the drills in its military playbook to prepare for the invasion of Taiwan. It is conducting large-scale military exercises and missile launches, as well as cyber attacks, disinformation campaign, and economic coercion in an attempt to weaken public morale in Taiwan. China's targeted large-scale military exercises are a serious provocation. China has used Speaker Pelosi's visit to Taiwan as a pretext, but is pursuing its true intentions in a number of ways. In terms of the range of its missile tests, China is clearly trying to deter other countries from interfering in its attempt to invade Taiwan. Its rehearsal of anti-access and area denial, or A2AD, tactics gives us a clear image of China's geostrategic ambition beyond Taiwan. In other words, China's real intention behind these military exercises is to alter the status quo in the Taiwan Strait and the entire region.
Today is the 77th anniversary of the atomic bombing that instantly killed over 75,000 people in the Japanese city of Nagasaki. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida joined officials in paying respects to the victims. Speaking to a crowd that included Japanese politicians, local leaders and foreign dignitaries, Kishida expressed sympathy for the people that died in the nuclear blast and those who continue to live with its effects. The Nagasaki atomic bombing came 3 days after US B-29 bomber, the Enola Gay, carried out the world's first nuclear attack in Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. The bombing killed approximately 140,000 people out of an estimated population of 350,000, with thousands more dying later of injuries and radiation-related illnesses. Still watching the world today, still ahead. Japan's Prince of Heat dies at the age of 84. Stay with us. Welcome back to the world today. Britain's cap on domestic energy prices is expected to rise to over £4,200 a year in January 2023. According to analysts at Cornwall Insights, the expected rise due to soaring wholesale costs and changes in the way the cap is set would see prices up 230% on the year before. The forecast comes as former Finance Minister Rishi Sunak and Foreign Secretary Liz Truss battle to become Britain's next Prime Minister, with the candidates clashing on how they will address soaring inflation and a cost of living squeeze. Asked by reporters how she would respond, Truss said she would deal with the circumstances as they arose, but she favoured cutting taxes to grow the economy.
What I'm talking about is enabling people to keep more money in their own pockets. What I don't believe in is taxing people to the highest level in 70 years and then giving them their own money back. We are Conservatives. We believe in low taxes. And what I'm not going to do is announce the next budget in advance. Of course, we'll need to deal with the circumstances as they arise. But my fundamental principle is that people should keep more of their own money, and we should be on the side of people who do the right thing, people who go out to work, people who set up their own businesses, people who are contributing to the economy, because we need economic growth to get through these difficult times. I'm not going to write the budget in advance. We'll see what the situation is like in the autumn, but I'm committed to making sure people are supported, and I'm committed to growing the economy. And what we can't have, I'm not going to comment on exactly what's going to be in the budget. What I've been clear about, what I am clear about is that from day one, I will reduce taxes, and I'll also have a temporary moratorium on the green energy levy to save people money on their fuel bills. And what's important is that we get the economy growing. We can't get the economy growing if we have the highest tax rates for 70 years in this country.
James Marape has been sworn in as the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea after lawmakers in the new parliament returned him unopposed to the post. The Governor-General of the Pacific Island nations, Sir Bob Dade, then oversaw a swearing-in ceremony for Marape, who will form a coalition government with over a dozen minor parties and independents. Marape, who became Prime Minister in 2019, said the coalition had a collective mandate and called for the nation to unite.
I now declare that the member for Taripori, Honorable James Marape, has been elected as Prime Minister-elect of the independent state of Papua New Guinea.
We are elected to serve them, we represent them, and collectively we are one people, one country, one nation. And I just want to appreciate the fact that today the parliament came in total unison. There was no dissenting view and opposing view.
China's Hainan, an island province dependent on tourism, has locked down more areas and expanded COVID-19 testing as it battles its worst COVID-19 outbreak after seeing very few cases in the past 2 years, compared with many other regions of the country. The curbs in Hainan, in line with China's dynamic COVID-0 policy that aims to stamp out outbreaks as soon as possible. A province which recorded just 2 local symptomatic COVID cases last year has reported more than 1,500 domestically transmitted infections this month, including over 1,000 symptomatic ones. At least 9 cities and towns with a population of about 7 million have ordered their residents not to leave where they live, except for necessary reasons such as COVID tests, grocery shopping or essential job roles. They've also suspended public transport services. Revolutionary Japanese fashion designer Issey Miyake has died. He was aged 84. Known for his innovative styles and perfume, Miyake built a global fashion brand which included designing Steve Jobs' famous black turtleneck jumpers. Miyake was known to work with traditional and modern fashion techniques during his long career. Japanese media report that he died of liver cancer on Friday, and a private funeral has already taken place. Born in Hiroshima in 1938, Miyake was just 7 years old when the city was devastated by an atomic bomb dropped by the United States. His mother died of radiation exposure 3 years later. He went on to Paris to make a name for himself before moving on back to Japan. Serena Williams suggests she is set to retire from tennis, saying she will be evolving away from the sport after the U.S. Open. Writing for Vogue, the American 23-time Grand Slam singles champion says she's moving towards other things that are important to me, her words, adding she does not like the word retirement. In an accompanying Instagram post, she wrote that the countdown has begun. Williams made a singles return at Wimbledon in June after a lengthy injury layoff that had led to speculation about her retirement. She says she will play at the U.S. Open, where she has won 6 of her major singles titles, later in August.
But can you...
I'm not joking.
Okay, so then explain to me what the light represents.
Freedom. Yeah. I love playing though. It's like, it's amazing, but you know, it's like, I can't do this forever. So it's just like, sometimes you just want to try your best to enjoy the moments and do the best that you can.
Tired of driving yourself? Well, you might be in luck. An electrically powered shuttle has been launched on the streets of Turin, the first self-driving vehicle it is for public transport, tested in Italy. Less than 5 meters long and 2 meters wide, the shuttle, developed by French startup Navia, can carry up to 14 passengers and is accessible to all. That's all thanks to a moving platform allowing people to board the vehicle. The autonomous vehicle can drive in normal urban traffic and detect obstacles, cars, bicycles or pedestrians thanks to its sensors and its GPS. But a driver will always be on board and will be able to steer the vehicle if necessary using a joypad. The vehicle will be free of charge and tested without passengers until October.
And so this shuttle is moving without driver, and my mission is to program the shuttle so the shuttle can understand how to drive in the streets of Turin. The GPS,
okay,
like in your car,
okay,
but more precise. There is also some lidars that you see here and here. And so we mapped all the streets, a 3D map of the streets, so the shuttle can recognize itself in the map and know where the shuttle is.
Well, if you're in Turin, hop in and tell us how it went. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.